Hey there, and welcome back to Checkbox Other. I am your host, Nikki Innocent. This podcast is all about celebrating those that don't fit in a defined box or category, and I am so excited you are here. If this is your first podcast episode, hello, welcome to the community and the conversation. I am so excited that you're here. If it isn't, oh hey, welcome back. Today's guest is Dr. T. Williams, and am I excited about him. So Dr. T holds a master's and a doctoral degree in social justice education and a master's in organizational leadership. When I say all this wonderful education, let me just tell you, today you will be getting an education yourself. It is one of the longer episodes that we have, but I promise you it is worth every moment. Get your pen and your pad ready. So Dr. T and I will be talking a lot about what he coins the dominant and targeted groups in society and how the dynamic of diversity, inclusion, liberation, oppression, how all of those wonderful words come together and how they're on a spectrum, how we think about them on a societal level and how we think about them on an academic level. I'm being so fast because I am so excited. We also talk about becoming aware of your own internal oppression that you have within yourself and stuff that has been taught to you from conditioning that you don't own yourself. Dr. T talks and generously shares his experience with homophobia and stuff that's learned so young that you don't even understand where it's coming from or understand that it's separate from yourself. We talk about violence and toxic masculinity, which I thought was such a beautiful conversation. And he shares an experience in his schooling about a panel discussion that he was a part of and that he got to witness. And let me tell you, it's worth taking a listen to how that went down and kind of putting yourself in that room if you can, and really understanding the depth and the gravity of conversation around what toxic masculinity has led to in our society with regard to violence. We also talk about whiteness, we talk about normalization, we talk about tone policing. And if you have heard that word, let me just tell you, this is a wonderful experience for you to dive deeper into it. If you haven't heard the word, we'll let you know all about it. It's something that is happening all day, every day. It will open your eyes. Your mind will be blown a little bit, I think. It's been something for me that has been a really important journey internally, personally, and then also it has been something that has been really fascinating to see play out in the larger landscape. And excited to hear how learning about it has then shown itself in life after the podcast, because I've known about tone policing for a little while and it has shifted my perspective on communication, shifted my perspective on discourse, both politically and just every day. Social media is like next level with examples of this. I think we might have talked a little bit about this with Elizabeth D'Alto too. I should mention Dr. T is a connection through Elizabeth D'Alto. So thanks, Elizabeth. I think that's enough of a couple teasers that we put in there. There's so many really great things that we talk about. Dr. T has me laughing about stuff that a lot of times you don't necessarily think you should laugh about. But really, this is all learning and growth. And if we can't get ourselves into a place of somewhat comfort to have these conversations, we're never going to be able to move forward. That is Dr. T. Quick logistics note, if this is your first time here listening, we publish episodes on the first Friday and the third Friday of every month. So I hope you come back. And if you haven't listened to any, go back and listen to some more. I also want to reference the fact that we have some incredible conversations coming up. So we have one around Me Too and how the Me Too movement is impacting the workplace. I have an incredible guest who sat down with me to talk about disability awareness, disability inclusion, and really the fact that folks with disabilities are much more than their disability, and how we as a society can become more of an ally, an advocate, and just more aware of how our society handles disability, whether it handles it or not. And when I tell you that my face was hurting at the end of that conversation, I was smiling so hard the whole time. Lillian, I love you. So that is my gushing about the guests coming up. And a couple of things in my life. So I'm listening, I mentioned this last time, I'm listening currently to Ibram X. Kendi's new book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. It came out and am I liking it? I'm about a third of the way through, and his stories are wonderful. His perspective is great. I found myself getting chills multiple times during it. So if it is something that is interesting to you, we're going to be talking a lot about racism in general, the isms overall, but racism in general in this episode. But definitely put a hold on in your library. Go buy the book, go buy the book for the guy. He's doing all this amazing work. My goodness. And also, the last thing I want to mention is I am doing a new keynote next week. Wow, it's next week. It will be for a high school women's summit. And the name of the summit is The Future is Female, because of course, that is such an exciting way to start the day. My keynote will be opening everything up, and the title of it is Lead Like You. It is all about embracing your unique strengths to step into your full leadership potential, not necessarily trying to fit the prototype or the mold or the model of what leadership has been in the past. I'll just let your mind wander to what that looks like. I think you could look at most boardrooms in America and see what we've been told a leader looks like. So I'll be speaking in front of over 100, I'm hoping closer to 2 high school women, and I believe their families, about ways for us to I hate to say lean in. I guess I'll say it. Lean into our leadership qualities, our unique leadership qualities, our strengths, and really shift what the next generation of leaders can look like. And that means that we have a much broader canvas to draw from with regard to who leaders are, what leaders look like, how they approach the world, how they approach problems, and how they lead. So that is the keynote I'm bringing to life in front of an incredible group of high school women. So if you know any high school women that are thinking about leadership, thinking about stepping into their leadership, thinking about business school at all, because that's kind of where it's going to be taking place. Really, I'd love to have you in the room. Take a look at my social media at Nikki Innocent on all the platforms to see some information there. There's information on how to register and how to get connected. So if we're not connected on social media, I should mention this too, please do head on over and follow me, connect with me, whatever. I always love to connect with the people that are listening to these conversations and hear from you about what you want to hear more about. A lot of abouts there. So let's get to the episode. I am so excited to hear what you think. Again, show notes, NikkiInnocent.com/podcast. You'll see Dr. T's wonderful face on there. Click through, follow through on there if you want to. And there's that link called Join the Conversation on there. If you have comments, questions, topics you want to hear about, drop them in there. All right, I'll catch you on the other side of this wonderful episode. Hi, Dr. T.
Hi, Nikki. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
It's such a treat. I am so grateful that Elizabeth introduced us.
I am as well. And it's funny, for those of you all who are listening, we decided to hop on a call a couple of minutes before the actual podcast interview. Y'all, we've been talking for a good 40 minutes. So this is going to be a good podcast is what I'm saying.
Yes. I mean, we could have talked. This is what happens, though.
Right.
We'll just have to do multiple of these. My goodness. Or I'll just fly out to LA and we'll just have a whole party. That's what'll happen.
I'm down.
Right?
100%. Let's do it.
Yes. Well, I want to kick this off by hearing, I've heard some of your journey, but I want to hear more of your journey. I want the listeners to hear about your journey that has led you to today.
Okay. I'll give, that's a long story, but I'll give you a couple highlights.
Perfect.
So my undergraduate degree is in psychology and Black studies. So I did that. And then I went to work in the governor's office. Absolutely hated that. And then did a little research.
Governor of Chicago, right?
Governor of Illinois.
Illinois. Sorry. Yeah.
Right. So did that for a year, hated it, and did some thinking about what I enjoyed, and I loved leadership and that sort of stuff. So I found the organizational leadership program at Gonzaga University, and I called the director of the program, and I called their director of multicultural affairs, spoke with both of them. They sounded cool. I was like, all right, I'm going. Here's my application. Now, I didn't visit before I sent my application and before I went there for the first time. I just really liked the program. Well, Gonzaga is a Jesuit school, and I didn't know what a Jesuit was. So I just knew they had a program that I liked, and I was going. So I drove across the country, and that was a whole that's a completely different story. But so I got there, and I got to campus, and I'm walking around, and half the campus is like these amazing cathedrals and like really religious looking buildings. I was like, that's this is, like in retrospect, this is like silly, but I'm like, wow, this is, why are all these cathedrals on campus? That's when, I at some point it hit me. Oh, this is a Catholic school.
Yeah.
Oh, so I got there, and turns out I was the only African American student, graduate student at the
Mhm.
school. There was a black woman who was from Burundi, but she's African, not African American, so we have very different sort of cultural experiences and so forth. There were some African American law students, but I never saw them. So basically, I was the only brown person in all of my classes, or the only. I mean, that's not true. That's not accurate. I was the only African American in all of my classes, and it was a trip, to say the least. So while I was there, I did this training of trainers for diversity and social justice. And it was conducted by this woman named Cindy Gallagher, and Cindy um, was just amazing. So Cindy was white, and she knew more about racism than anybody I'd ever met in my life. And she kicked white people's asses on the regular. Like, she didn't take no shit from white people with racism. And she was just amazing. And she was 6 feet tall and had bright red hair, and she was a lesbian. So at that time, I would argue I was fairly homophobic. So I did this training with her, and like the entire training was just phenomenal. And not only did she kick white people's asses, she kicked my ass too. And
Mm.
like, she didn't take any like sexist, misogynistic bullshit from me. And like, I was just in love with this woman. I adored her. I was like, yes, you my people. So what was interesting about this was that Cindy was openly gay in Spokane, Washington, which is like right down the road from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which is where all the white militia lives, right? So there were tinges of that in Spokane. So she was like out and open and doing her thing in a place that was more than normally hostile, right?
Yeah.
And so I admired that. And but I had some conflicting feelings, right? On one hand, there's all the homophobic stuff that I was taught growing up. On the other hand, was my absolute adoration for her. And those
Mm.
things were in conflict and creating cognitive dissonance regularly. So, as you know, human beings, the human mind does not like dissonance of that nature. So I did what I could, right? So I researched, I read stuff, and it just wasn't enough. So I talked to Cindy, and I was like, Cindy, this is going on in my head. I, by this time we were friends. We'd hung out and like all these kinds
Yeah.
of things. And so I asked her if she would be willing to have a conversation with me about this, and she said yes. So we went to Denny's of all places, because I don't know why we went there. Like, there weren't a lot of other places we could go in Spokane, I suppose. But we went there, and I remember the conversation being a little bit uncomfortable, but there was a pivotal moment where she said to me, I don't care if you approve, quote unquote, of my lifestyle, but if it is your expectation that that I, as a white person, fight against your oppression, it is my expectation that you, as someone who is heterosexual, fight against my oppression. And that just absolutely stunned me into silence.
Yeah.
Like, it broke my brain. And what she was talking about was the absolute most basic form of allyship that you could possibly have. I will show up for you as you show up for me. And I sat with that for a while, and I couldn't argue. Like, what do you say to this? And I was like, all right.
You're like, no, I'm good.
I mean, it really did sort of break my head in that moment. I don't
Yeah.
remember anything else from that conversation, but I remember that.
Yeah.
And I remember at the end of that conversation, my head was spinning.
Yeah.
And we landed in a place where I hear you, I respect you, I love you, and I think you're right. And my work's not done,
Yeah.
right? Because I still had this stuff. And so I spent weeks like wandering around in life with this stuff in my head until I don't know what the catalyst was, but I reached a point where I realized what I was given through socialization and what was actually mine through choice were not the same thing, and that
Right.
I am not my beliefs,
Mm.
right? And so if I were being true to myself and acting with integrity in the world, it meant rejecting my socialization. And when I realized that who I am is not who this person was, right? That I believe in equality and love for my friend and appreciation for my friend, and I don't really care who she loves as long as she loves somebody,
Mm,
then I could then begin the process of letting go of all of the things that I was socialized to believe.
right.
And that was an interesting process. It really was a matter of this was given to me, but it's not mine.
Yes. Yeah.
So it was fascinating, man, because that happened in a plethora of ways in my time at Gonzaga University. And so so I asked Cindy, where'd you learn all this stuff? And she over there at UMass. So I was like, I'm going. So I applied to UMass, the University of Massachusetts Amherst,
Mhm.
where the program was the social justice education program. And what's interesting about that, it was the first program in the United States on social justice.
Wow.
And that the book that other people read to learn about the field of social justice is the book that comes out of that department. And the people who were there, I feel so amazingly fortunate to have entered that program when I did,
Mm.
because first of all of the people in the program were women. All of the professors, I'm sorry, were
Wow.
all women, and they each of them were powerful as hell in their own way.
Yeah.
And there was Jimenez Zuniga, who was white and from Chile. There was Pat Griffin, who was white and very heavily involved in sports and the was lesbian. There was Dr. Barbara Love, who's African American, very much a proponent of liberation and all things self-awareness and oppression theory and
Mm.
decolonizing before it became a thing. And then let's see, Barbara, Pat Jimena, and Dr. Maureen Adams, who is, I don't even have words for her. Maureen is very much a traditional scholar, but not a traditional thinker. And so
Oh.
she's very rigorous in her approach.
Mm.
And I came to appreciate that on a whole different level. I didn't like it in my dissertation because she was on the committee, but she's just powerful. So anyway, I went into this program, and I was the only heterosexual black man in the program. There were two
Okay.
other black men, and they were gay, and they
Mhm.
were giving me the side eye, right? Because they didn't know I- if I could be trusted, right?
Right.
They didn't know if they were safe with me.
Mm.
And so most of the remainder of the people in the program were white lesbian women. Okay,
Mm. Mm.
so it really created this culture that I was unaccustomed to being in,
Yeah.
and part of that is that there was a lot of processing that happened, a lot of processing, and I used to be like, "Yo, I'm not here for this. Like, fuck all these emotions. Like, first of all, I'm a dude. We don't do emotions, and secondly, I don't listen. I don't care. I remember this very clearly. I had to get up and leave the room. So we do these personal check-ins at the
Okay.
beginning of class, right? And so during one of the check-ins, one of the women who was a lesbian, her partner had left her for a man
Okay.
on that day. And so understandably, she brought that into the classroom.
Yep.
And I literally got up and walked out of the room. I couldn't take it anymore. It was too much. And it was, in retrospect, it was very callous, right? But
Yeah.
understand that I was very much at the beginning of my journey here.
Yeah.
And I was, again, not accustomed to or comfortable with feelings, and B, like with my own feelings. So
Mm.
I definitely had trouble with other people's. But my thing was this: in the classroom, I'm not here for this. I'll buy you a beer afterward, but we in class right now,
Right.
and I'm not trying to hear that. What I didn't understand was the person was always political.
Yes.
And so, in retrospect, that's a cringe-worthy moment. But I had a
Yeah.
lot of those
Yeah.
because that program required me to grow in some ways that were unanticipated. So there were a whole bunch of moments, but there are three big pivotal moments that I sort of speak to when I talk about this. The first is uh, so in order to teach anything related to social justice, we have an entire class called self-awareness. And the point of that class is that you need to know your own shit and you need to
Yes.
be in control of it before you step into a role of leadership and a role of educator. So that's the point of the entire class. Look at your stuff, learn to recognize your triggers, recognize your patterns, deconstruct your patterns, and get a liberatory way of living your life. Basically, right? So one day, I spent the entire first time I took that class multiple times. I spent the entire class with my arms folded, like, ugh. I don't know why I'm a dude. We don't do emotions. Anger is my fuel. Like literally, I said that shit. It's so cringy now that I think about it. But so one day, Barbara asked me what I felt about something, and so I thought about it and say, well, I think blah 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 blah. And she said, okay, you just told us what you think. Now tell us how you feel. So I looked at her. I was like, okay, well, I think blah 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 blah. She said, she said, you told us what you think. Tell us how you feel. I was like, I'm trying. And yeah, I get pissed. And I get pissed for multiple reasons. First, I was like, stop fucking with me. And then second, I realized that I couldn't answer her question. And I couldn't answer her question because I didn't have access to my feelings and I didn't have the language to talk about it. But I felt them. I felt the pressure of them. I felt it swirling around me. I felt stuff, but it was such an unfamiliar and uncomfortable feeling that I couldn't really I couldn't communicate any of it. And so again, I spent the entire class just mad the entire time. And then at the end of the class, I was like, all right, fine. There's something to this shit. I'll do it again. So I did it. I took that class multiple times, and then I wound up co-teaching it with Barbara.
Amazing.
And that class was instrumental in me as a man learning to look at, understand, perceive, talk about my own emotions. And what's really interesting is that I think one of the reasons I was so angry is somewhere in there I realized that the way that I was raised as a man left me emotionally truncated. I had an extremely narrow range of emotion that I was taught to operate in. And that made me angry. That pissed me off. But then I realized that anger, it was one of the few things that I was allowed to feel. And then I got pissed off because I was pissed off. So again, I was mad all the time. But that was again one of the first instrumental experiences of this journey of mine. A second was we took weekend workshops on every ism, and like it was Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And so we had to, particularly if we were interested in teaching about that ism, first we had to take it as a participant. Then we had to sit in as an observer and pending a couple of other things. Then we co-taught it with a lead facilitator, and then we got to teach it by ourselves. So there was a very methodical process where we learned several things. We got to participate and do our own work. Then we got to watch other people doing the work. Then we got to do the work with someone who had experience doing the work, and then do the work. And so that was a very significant part of my journey. I worked with masters who, when it came to teaching about these issues. When I say masters, each of these women that taught me and led these endeavors were masterful in their approaches in very, very different ways.
And when you say isms, what isms are you talking about specifically?
Racism, classism, sexism, trans oppression, ableism, youth oppression, elder oppression, and religious oppression. And anti-Semitism, which is a form of religious oppression, but it is separate and distinct and sort of its own phenomena, similar to in the way that Islamophobia is separate and distinct and its own phenomena. So I did this thing, this class on sexism, and there are two big things that happened in there. The first was on the first day, there was a panel discussion. At first, it was led by Dr. Stephen Botkin, who was the founder of Men's Resources the Men's Resources Center, which was a place where men who abused women unlearned abusive behavior and learned more positive models of masculinity.
Wow.
But they also ran men's groups and youth groups for young men.
Okay.
So he did that work. And then he created Men's Resources International, where literally he went all around the world teaching men to be better men. And then his work has now evolved into another organization that I can't remember the name of. So Stephen was dope and still is dope. I adore that dude. He had a panel discussion with a married couple, a man and a woman.
Okay.
And the man was very abusive to his family, physically, verbally, you name it.
Yeah.
And his woman sitting next to him was his wife and the woman he abused. And that was probably one of the most uncomfortable experiences I have ever had in my life.
Yeah.
It was also one of the most powerful and significant. But this dude, I wish I could remember his name, was very open and stunningly honest about a lot of things. He talked about what he was taught as a boy, the way he was abused as a boy, how that translated into what he understood a man to be, and then he talked about abusing his entire family.
Wow.
And his wife talked about her experience as his wife and talked about what it was like to be abused. And
like this is in depth, like in detail. This couple is getting like in front of strangers.
Yes.
Wow.
And so that's I have a separate story about that if you want to hear it, but let me get to this.
Yeah.
So
tell all the things.
Yeah, she was very open and honest and told all the things. But at the end of one of the times she was speaking, I will never forget this. She said it wasn't the black eyes or the broken bones that bothered me. It was the words that he said to me, because those words have never gone away.
Whoa.
And so, first of all, the idea that there were black eyes and broken bones, like, what the fuck is that? But secondly, the idea that even though they are reconciled and still together and have a better relationship, like, she's still dealing with the legacy of the abuse.
Right.
And man, listen, everybody in the workshop broke down, myself included. It was just, it was a, so,
well, and if you think about it a little bit, right? Like, there is such an interesting part of the physical aspect of the black eye and the broken bone. You actually see the healing happen, or you have the ability to watch the progress of that healing happen, where when there's the wound of the words, you don't have that visual experience of healing and of realizing that, look, okay, this body, yes, it was broken, but it is made to automatically heal itself. Whereas like with words, we don't have that same kind of mechanism that just automatically happens that allows us to heal ourselves from something like that.
And so that's a big part of it, but also, the ways in which the legacy of that, meaning the internalized subordination that came along with that, right?
Yeah.
Which is what I wrote my dissertation topic on. I actually talked about internalized subordination, internalized oppression as a psychological state and as a spiritual state, if that's one of the frameworks that you use. So it just completely messed my head up.
Yeah.
And again, it was one of those things that I've never, ever forgotten. We had and to Stephen's credit, one of the things that he talks about and never shies away from is men's violence. And it's an explicit conversation around men's violence, because men are the people who are enacting the violence, generally speaking, 9 times out of 10. Yeah. And we got to discuss the ways that we were violent, but also the ways that we had violence enacted upon us.
Right.
Both as men, but also as young people, right? So it's the intersection of both gender and youth oppression as well. So it's just a powerful experience. But also from that workshop, we learned about sexism in media. And so, which at this point, my mind was just swimming with stuff. So I was on a bus,
My
and
mind is swimming right now. Yeah.
it was a super intense experience
Yeah.
and very transformational. And the thing is, I had experiences like that continuously because the nature of the program was content knowledge, uh, theoretical frameworks, and pedagogy. And so, in the midst of all that was a commitment to experiential education,
Right.
and within that was a commitment to dialogue, right, and the tools of dialogue and the tools of liberatory pedagogy. So we did a lot of focusing on how to teach these things in ways that don't reproduce the things we're teaching about.
Mm.
And so that's why you will hear me talk a lot about shame, blame, and guilt in the pedagogical processes of other folks that sometimes operate in this space.
Yeah.
When you utilize shame-inducing pedagogy, whether or not it's in the service of a particular ism, you are doing harm to folks.
Right.
Period.
And
Because
perpetuating the patterns.
right, you're
Yeah.
you're doing harm to folks, and in the process, you're reproducing, installing, reproducing, instilling, perpetuating, maintaining systems of oppression.
Yeah.
Even if it's in the service of anti-racism. The fact of the matter is we all have multiple identities, and we have different positions within the social hierarchies of those identities. And what I mean by that is this: I am cisgendered and I am a man, and I occupy a position of dominance in that respect. I'm also African American, so I am targeted in that respect. And all of those things are happening within me simultaneously.
Right.
And this is one of the things Audre Lorde talks about. She was so far ahead of her time, y'all.
Right.
So there's a piece called There Is No Hierarchy of Oppression. And if you Google that and put a comma and then PDF, it'll pop right up. You can read it for yourself.
I'll
But
put it
it's
in
a
the show notes.
Okay, cool. It's
Yeah.
a brilliant and very simple and straightforward commentary that all of us experience in one way or another all forms of oppression, and that within us is a meeting place of both the experience of dominance and the experience of being targeted. And so each of us have a unique experience in the world based upon those collection of identities. And it's one of the things that Kimberly Crenshaw hit on when she initially began her discussions of intersectionality, because
Right.
intersectionality did not start out as a theory of identity, it started out as a theory of oppression.
Right.
And
Right.
they are connected, but it's not quite the same thing.
Mm.
Of course, that theory has evolved since then, right? And so if
Right.
you're looking for an updated understanding of what intersectionality is, go to the YouTubes,
The
and
YouTubes.
type the YouTubes and type in Kimberly Crenshaw. She did a wonderful TEDx, very short, concise, explaining what she means. This is
Yeah.
her theory, explaining what she means when she says intersectionality.
Yeah.
That was a big old tangent, but
Hey, I
so
liked it.
I'm
I'm
on the
all
bus.
about it.
I'm on the bus, and we just saw all the sexism in media, and my head's swimming, and another bus rolled by, and on that bus was a advertisement for elevators, and it had a woman with a very full bosom, and it was like on display,
Yeah.
and I was like, I was confused
Right.
because I was like, this advertisement is for elevators.
Yeah.
Why do they have this woman with her chest out for elevators? And I was like, oh shit, that's what we were talking about.
You're like, it's
So,
everywhere.
Yeah, that's it though. I
Yeah.
went home, I turned on the TV, it's like traditional gender roles and commercials. Like I saw it everywhere. And it was a complete Twilight Zone moment.
Yeah.
I couldn't handle it. I shut the TV off and went to bed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But so those are some examples of some of the pivotal experiences that I had, right? But it kept happening again and again and again until I don't know. I reached the point where my emotional and intellectual awareness caught up with each other.
Yeah. Wow.
Like,
Okay.
which for a cisgendered heterosexual dude, that is a feat and a half, y'all. Let me tell you, I ain't mad at any You know what? I was talking to my friend last night about this, about how abysmally low the standards are for men. Like the bar is so low, I think, for men, it's unreal,
Mm,
phenomenally unreal. So it was a process to get to this point. Um,
right.
and it's a consistent process of multiple things, of my own vulnerabilities and looking at my own stuff, but also of teaching and learning and being in communities with colleagues who are also teaching and learning, and sometimes stepping on people's toes and making a lot of mistakes and apologizing and learning to do better and doing better, and then making more mistakes and then learning again to do better and doing better. Like
Yeah.
mistakes are sort of an inherent part of this process, and I
Yeah.
think most people miss that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that I yeah, I think there are two pieces. I think there's the mistakes, but the accountability for your mistakes, I think, is where the miss tends to happen, right? Like I think we do feel whether we know what the mistake was or not, we feel when something didn't go right, but we might not know exactly what it is, and then when we don't necessarily want to find out because we don't want to have ownership of it, or we do know what it is, but we don't want to have ownership of the emotion or the feeling or the rectifying behavior to fix what just happened.
I like your hopefulness, but I would also I would also add that there are people in the world who are 100% completely oblivious
Yeah.
to the ways that their behavior A might be problematic and B impact others. And I think that men are socialized to be emotionally oblivious. We
Right.
aren't taught to pay attention necessarily always to the impact of our actions on other people, particularly when the other people belong to targeted groups in which we occupy space of dominance, or targeted identities, social identities in which we have dominance.
Well, and
Right?
you even saying that it was difficult to say I feel, right? I think was super comfortable, but
Yeah.
even to just say the words I feel, and the fact that that's kind of where you're starting, to the point where you just said my emotional and intellectual, they met. I mean, that's incredibly impressive. And I think that that's a part of why, I mean, maybe this is what I was saying to you earlier before we hopped in the call. Like, I'm just so in awe of the way you hold spaces and the way that you allow for people to learn and grow. I think that the ability for you to give yourself the chance to do and learn and grow and mess up and make mistakes and beat yourself up a little bit, but learn from it, like that whole, again, that whole personal experience feeding into the ability to then create the space for other people to learn things that they might not be aware of, and maybe they're completely oblivious to that. My hopeful self is like, no, 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 they know somewhere, maybe.
I let me also add that it is a perpetual process of learning and unlearning and healing uh, to to keep your emotional awareness reasonably in line with your intellectual awareness and growth. Because it's important to bear in mind that for dominant groups, uh, the work is never done. There is no end point, no end destination that you will reach where you get a certificate that says you have arrived. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Like,
No
because
more work for you.
right, like we
Yeah.
live in a society where people in positions of dominance have that have the world set up for them, and have their stories told and retold, and see themselves reflected in every aspect of culture, in every aspect of institutional life.
Yeah.
And so when you live in a world that was set up and created and made for you, you're taught that the privilege that you receive is normal,
Right.
right? And so it's a consistent exercise of metacognition to be able to be aware of your thinking process,
Mm.
so that you can learn and to exist outside of the pattern ways of thinking and acting, and be aware of the liberation, be aware of the oppression, but also enact liberation.
Right.
So, for those of y'all who are not familiar with the term, metacognition is simply thinking about your thinking. And so,
And
how,
thinking
so
a bit about your not thinking, it sounds like too, being aware of where your blinders might be blocking you. Did I hear that right?
um, I mean, it's six on one hand, half a dozen on the
Okay,
other.
okay.
Like you
You're
can,
like, yes, Nikki. Sure.
well, I mean, but the thing is this: you're not thinking is also a pattern of thinking,
Right.
because we know that systems of oppression have systems of thought, belief, and understanding about the world and everyone's place in it. And so, what is very important to note is that gaps in that knowledge and inaccurate information and misinformation are an inherent part of the system. And so, therefore, making mistakes as we try to evolve and grow and learn are also an inherent part of the system. And so, I talked about this on one of the posts on the Instagrams. Uh, I think it was in a post where I talked about intention. Um, if you scroll down, I think it was a minute ago, but there's a post
I'll
in there
find
about
it.
it. Yeah,
Yep.
there's a post in there about intention and why intention matters.
Yes. Oh,
So
I
let's have
love
that.
this post.
Yeah, let's have this
Yes, bring it,
conversation.
bring it. Yeah.
So there are like several mantras that get repeated in the social justice, social media space, and one of them is your intentions don't matter. And for me, that statement lacks nuance,
Hmm.
and it is just one of those things that sounds good that people say that other people repeat.
Right. And I
So,
mean, mine was your intentions don't matter as much as the impact. Right. So as much as then just nullifies and it's like impact matters, intention doesn't. Right. That's it. That's kind of what you're saying here. Okay.
my approach on this includes a different statement, but
Mm.
also some additional thoughts.
Yes. Bring it.
So, first, I absolutely think intention matters. Here's why. On a personal level, I'm from the south side of Chicago, y'all, and I got a whole different side that y'all don't get to see. And if you make a mistake and it is clear to me that that was not your intention and I was harmed by your mistake, you will get one side of me. But if it is
Mhm.
clear that you did harm to me and you intended to do harm to me, you will get a completely different side of me.
Right.
So
Okay.
on a personal level,
Yeah.
let's be clear about that. If you doing me harm, you doing me dirty on purpose.
Hmm.
Listen, that's a different ball game we play.
Right.
And that being said, I know I have made mistakes. I have misgendered people. I've made sexist comments. I have done all manner of things. We all have. Again, that is a part of the system. And working ourselves into a place where we are enacting liberation, we will make mistakes.
Right.
So if I know that I made mistakes and that is part of the system, then I know that when other people make mistakes and I get targeted by those mistakes, it's also part of the
Part of the
system.
system. Yeah.
So being aware of your intention allows me to be more empathetic and more understanding when I think about what has happened and I consider what my reaction will be.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so if we can understand that these mistakes will happen, and if we can understand that in granting each other grace when we make these mistakes and make a commitment to do better, uh, then we can, in a more constructive, holistic way, push back against this in a way that leads to evolution in thinking and behavior.
I like that. So I'm going to pull us back like 1 minute because
Yeah.
I think that, you and I are speaking because we're in a lot of these spaces talking about social justice, specifically talking about how we'll say mainstream the words diversity and inclusion have become. And I'd love to hear from your perspective of how things like, intention doesn't matter, it's the impact that matters, or no matter, or I actually am hearing your kind of reference of dominance instead of majority and minority, which I think is a lot of the language that's used. How have you seen from when you entered the education, I would say Gonzaga, UMass, how have you seen this landscape of conversation shift over the last, 10 years or so?
Hmm.
Because I think
I
a lot of people, they're just hearing these words for the first time or just understanding what these words really mean rather than them being some boogeyman type word that like means
mhm,
something that's not great, but I'm not going to get too close to understand it.
right. I think the biggest change is that now the language of social justice is a part of common discourse. So when I first entered the social justice program, it certainly was not. And we got a lot of flack, actually, from UMass in general and within the School of Education because people didn't understand what we did.
Okay.
There was not an understanding of what social justice was, what the point of it was, why do we need an entire discipline devoted to learning how to teach about these issues, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
The second thing is that, and this is an extremely important point, one of the things that I talk about frequently is being a critical thinker and a critical consumer of information as it pertains to all of these things. And I tell everyone who has ever been in any of my classes, do not accept something from in this course simply because I say it. So when I say be critical, I don't mean be critical of people who are saying problematic things. That's easy. I'm saying be critical of myself as well.
Right.
And choose your teachers carefully. So not everyone who is in the social justice, social media space, not everyone is an educator.
Right.
Not everyone posits themselves to be an educator. Not everyone has been trained to be an educator.
Right.
And believe it or not, that makes a difference. So
Definitely.
all of that being said, one of the ways that we absolutely must be critical is understanding the different frameworks that people operate from when they do this work. Because not all of us agree on a whole bunch of stuff. Not all of us are operating from the same framework. And a framework is a structured and organized way of thinking about a given phenomena. That's it.
Right.
It's like one of those $10 academic words, right? But
Right.
that's what it means.
Yeah.
So different frameworks come with different strengths and challenges.
Okay.
So I'm going to run this down real quick. This is if doing this work were to lie on a continuum, this is what that continuum would look like. First, there's an individual differences paradigm. Then there's a group differences paradigm. Then there's multiculturalism. Then there's diversity. Now, the thing about diversity is that as a lens and as a framework, it has been consistently evolving and it's moving closer and closer to social justice. So first there was diversity, then there was diversity and inclusion. Now it's evolving into diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Right.
And if you look at the far edges, there's diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
Right.
So for me, like when you splitting hairs that much, it says that the framework that you're operating in is insufficient. That's neither here nor there. I have some serious critiques about the diversity and inclusion framework. But that being said, again, individual differences, group differences, multiculturalism, diversity, inclusion, diversity, equity, inclusion, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, anti-oppression, social justice, liberation.
Okay.
So all of those things have strengths and challenges and weaknesses. I operate probably from the latter half of that on. My primary framework is a liberation framework, which is inclusive of social justice, diversity, equity, and belonging. It is inclusive in anti-oppression-ish, but there's a fundamental difference between a liberation perspective and an anti-oppression perspective. And very often, social justice perspectives are anti-oppression perspectives.
Right.
So a critical liberation perspective, well, there's a whole bunch of differences, but one of the primary differences is that it asks us to consider and place our emphasis on what we are fighting for, rather than what we are fighting against.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's a very small but very significant shift.
Right.
And one of the reasons that came about, well, first of all, I got to give some praise to my teacher, because I'm of the belief you must always mention your teacher in your work. A lot of my thinking and a lot of the core of critical liberation theory is based on the work of Dr. Barbara Love. And so in doing this work, I burned myself out 3 good times. And on the third time, I just couldn't get out of bed. I broke up with someone that I cared about deeply at the time. And it took everything out of me. And it took me months to recover. And when I did, I started saying no to everything. Like, nope, I'm not doing that workshop. Nope, I'm not going to sit on your board. Nope, I'm not doing any of these things. And for me, it was a matter of survival.
Yeah.
Right? Because this work is not it's not a luxury, right? This
Right.
shit is life or death in a whole bunch of different ways.
Right. And
So
it takes a lot of energy. I mean,
it does,
it's not just something that you're really excited about and you're passionate about, and therefore it just is uplifting all the time and just fills your energy cup. A lot of this stuff takes, even just to stand in the space and talk about these things is difficult, but then to hold the space for other people to work through it, the
right,
amount of energy that goes through that, oh my goodness.
right. And so therein lies the conundrum. How can we do this work in ways that are sustainable? Because the way
Hmm.
that we're doing it right now is not.
True.
And it wasn't just me that was burned out. My colleagues were burned out. My professors were burned out. Everybody was burned out.
Yeah.
And so I had that question. Some of my other colleagues had that question. And so Barbara, who's just a wonderful human being in the world, I adore her deeply, uh, talks about liberation a lot. And so we did what people in academia do. We sat around a table with some coffee and snacks, and we theorized. And basically, Bell Hooks talks about this in Killing Rage, I think. She talks about how theory saved her life. And basically, theory is an explanation for a given phenomenon. Again, it's a $10 word,
Right.
where a nickel word to do. But it's theory refers to the the analyses and constructions that academics to create to explain XYZ.
Right.
And when I say that we theorized, we sat around a table and talked about
Liberation.
liberation, and we
Yeah.
talked about social justice, and we talked about where they intersected, and we talked about what was hard, and we talked about what was necessary. And this happened on multiple occasions. And what came out of that is critical liberation theory.
Okay.
And so critical liberation theory, again, part of what it asks us to do is focus on what we want. And so it's an entirely different way of thinking about this stuff. As a matter of fact, Amy Soon from Small Steps podcast, she she um, she took both my foundations course and my self-awareness course and advanced self-awareness. And so one day she called me up, and she was like both excited and confused.
Yeah.
So we were working through something. She was like, "Man, liberation is an entire way of life." And I was like, you just hit the nail on the head right there. It really is an entire way of life. It's a completely different way of thinking about how to do this work. So for
So,
example,
yeah, I was gonna say, can you give me like, can you just
so
take all those courses and put them in like one sentence, or can you give? Because I think there's a part of this that I want to make sure that we're kind of in a common space of understanding what liberation means,
right.
even if in the dictionary, kind of what liberation means and what social justice means relative to that, and like really kind of getting to a common understanding of vocabulary.
Oh,
I know, sorry.
that we could spend the next hour doing that. So when I'm talking, so liberation, just so one of the things that we do in my foundations course is we talk about what is social justice, right? And there are four different elements of social justice. And then we talk about what is liberation, also four different elements, right? So liberation is a philosophy, it's a path, it's a practice, and it's something else that I'm not remembering at the moment. Um, Oh man, if I knew we were going to talk about this,
It'll
I'd have
come in.
pulled up
It'll
those
come
notes.
in. Don't
It'll
worry.
come.
Don't
It'll
worry.
come.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about liberation, part of one of the big differences is the philosophical underpinnings of of the discipline, right? Of the theoretical body of knowledge.
Sorry. I'm a
So
little lost, but I'm
okay,
following. I'll follow you. I'll follow you.
all
Keep
right.
going.
So a theoretical body of knowledge is, if a theory is a way of thinking about something, a
Yeah.
theoretical body of knowledge is a collection of a whole bunch of different thoughts about that same thing.
Right.
And you would consider that a body of knowledge, a body of work.
Okay.
So if I have some thoughts about blue buttons, and you have thoughts, and Amy has thoughts, I have my theory on blue buttons, you have
Right.
your theory of blue buttons, Amy has her theory of blue buttons, and together our theories, plural, of blue buttons occupy the space of a body of knowledge.
Right.
That's,
And so
that's
the
all.
same thought would be your understanding of what liberation is, Amy's understanding of what liberation is, and what my understanding of liberation is, or my theories, I should say,
Right.
would bring a whole body of,
Right. That would create a body of knowledge. So,
and that's what we're sitting around having snacks talking about. That's what you're talking about?
no, because before you even get to the point where you create a body of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Before a theory becomes something that is real and tangible and that you can chew on, there's some pre-work that gets done. I'm like spilling all the secrets of academia.
Don't spill them all.
I'm spilling them all. Okay,
No.
so here's what that means, right? Before we can theorize and talk about what liberation is and what the challenges are and all of those things, we first had conversations of, look, y'all, I can't keep doing this shit. I burned myself out. I couldn't get out of bed. I was depressed, and I feel like we're not making progress.
Yeah.
And then you say, yeah, and then we have some cookies, and then we keep talking, right? So there's work that happens before you create something, before you create a theory.
Right.
And it's the exploration of the thing that you're talking about in whatever direction that exploration needs to go.
Right.
So as a part of that, as a body of knowledge or a theoretical body, liberation has a philosophical path, a philosophical way of thinking about and considering the world and the people in it. Part of that philosophy of liberation is that healing of every human is necessary for us to create a society that A, works for all of us, and B, allocates goods and services and creates systems that works for all of us.
Yeah.
Okay? So
yeah, I'm in.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let me add this last piece because
Yeah.
it's a little controversial. When we say the healing of every human,
Yeah.
if we know that humans have multiple social identities and that different identities are dominant and different identities are targeted, that means that every human must be healed in both their dominant identities and their targeted identities, because things get done to humans to force them into the role of dominance.
Right.
So one of the easy ways that conversation plays out is what happens to young boys such that they then become proponents and adherents of toxic masculinity.
Right.
They get shamed, they get verbally abused, they get beaten and have violence enacted upon them. They are taught to enact violence on other people. They are taught to dehumanize people so that they may intellectually and emotionally feel okay about enacting their violence, right? There's all kinds of things that happen to young boys. They have the love beaten out of them, the tenderness beaten out of them, like all kinds of things happen.
Right.
And those things must be healed before we can, or as we are going about the process, not before, because you can do them both, but as we are going about this process. Now, that is a single identity.
Right.
When we begin to talk about white people needing to heal from the things that whiteness have been done to them, I usually get a lot of strong reactions from that.
Right. Well, and a lot of times, in a lot of these conversations that I've had for the podcast and elsewhere, even just defining whiteness, not even addressing all the components that have created whiteness, it's just coming up with an understanding of the fact that whiteness is a thing, and we should define that. We talk about, it's much more socially acceptable to talk about I like the dominant and targeted, the targeted dynamics in our society, because we're already talking about them. Whether, we're already very aware, but the dominance, as you said, is it doesn't get a name, it gets normal. It becomes normal instead of. And so without the definition of whiteness, how do you understand where it's coming from and what the impacts are?
It's funny that you say that. There are a plethora of characteristics of systems of oppression, and normalization is one of the primary characteristics.
Yeah.
That it is normalized. It is the status quo. It's just a thing that happens. So, for example, if there is a building that is inaccessible to people who use wheelchairs for mobility, if you don't use a wheelchair, then it's just normal. Stairs are normal. If there's no ramp, no worries, it's normal, right? And the only thing that is necessary for that situation to continue to occur is that we do nothing.
Right.
Because another characteristic of oppression is that they are systems of oppression are mutually reinforcing and self-perpetuating.
Yeah. Okay. I like this. Okay, keep going. So you're talking about
Where I don't know where we are in this.
I don't care. I'm bringing
us
us back because I loved you talking about kind of what we've created in young boys to normalize toxic masculinity as our status quo, and as something that like it is so ingrained so young, right? And actually naming and understanding the shame that goes into that and the violence that goes into that. And you were talking about the same comes when we're talking about whiteness, and talking about the factors with which we have in our society and our systems that allow whiteness to act in a similar way, with regard to how we talk about toxic masculinity.
Right. And so the same is true for classism, for example. And the ways in which our society learns to uh, to value people who have money, as if wealth within a system that is set up to serve the wealthy is some sort of marker of extraordinary intelligence or extraordinary ability, or arguably, I think we can see with our current president that is not necessarily true. And for those of y'all who are Trump supporter and you don't like what I said, that's okay. You get to have your very wrong opinion.
But also, right, the whole idea that wealth is normalized, like if you listen, the gap in our country, wealth is not normal, but we are all talking about it as though, yeah, I have wealth, or I'm working towards wealth, or that is, there is some piece of this that, like, though people are not operating with, people are having to worry about their finances and their collective wealth, but we talk about it like it's normal to not, and that if you have any different experience, you got to shove it down, shove it away.
I think classism is one of the great taboos in this country. Part of it is because of the cultural myth of the United States, and how class operates here, up by your bootstraps, social mobility, and all of that sort of nonsense. Certainly, the research does not bear it out in terms of the cultural myth matching the actual reality of the country. But you know what's interesting? This liberation stuff, I think it's beautiful and brilliant, but I would be lying if I said that I accepted it easily. Because I was like, A, this is bullshit. And B, what the hell white people got to heal from? And C, what do rich people got to heal from? And I went to a liberation conference, and there was a woman there who was really wealthy. She lived in Europe in a fucking castle, like legit a real castle.
Yeah.
And so when she was speaking, I went with Barbara, Dr. Barbara Love.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't gonna go to that. Because when I was raised working class, so a lot of my triggers are around class stuff.
Yep.
So I was like, listen, I ain't trying to hear nothing this rich lady got to say.
Right. Yeah.
I'm gonna go on down the road and get me a snack.
Yep.
And Barbara, in her very wonderful, loving way, strongly encouraged me to go. So I was like, fine, I'll go.
Just for you, Barbara. That's it.
Basically, that's what I said. I was like, if there was anybody else asking, I'd be like, fuck off. I don't want to, like, really?
Yeah.
Really? The liberation of wealthy people. That sounds completely absurd.
Right.
But I went. And I will say, I wish I could remember this woman's name, because she was profound in her discussion of the ways that wealth harms human beings.
Yeah.
I have never heard anything like it, and I've never heard anything since. So, also, subsequent to that, I had an opportunity to work in and amongst and around wealthy people, and I will say, yes, wealth fucks people up in some really tripped out ways.
Yes. Yes.
This is how she started her speech. She said, every war that has ever been fought in the history of the world has been fought on behalf of and in the interests of wealthy people. And the death and destruction that occurs from those wars, the disease, the famine, the starvation, most of the human ills in the world could easily be solved if there were an equitable allocation of resources. And then she said, imagine what has to happen to a child for them to grow up and think and believe that it is okay for the rest of the world to suffer for them. And like right now, my skin's crawling,
Yeah.
like getting goosebumps.
Right. And believe that, but then also sustain that belief as you live life and
Action.
meet more people. Yeah, yeah, yep. And have the experience.
Right. And so she talked about what her life was like growing up in that castle and how
Wow.
her family had a deeper commitment to money than they had to each other,
Yep.
including her, and
Mm-hmm.
how, she was raised by the help and all of these other things that then she used to paint a picture of how that turns into a certain way of being.
Right.
So here's the thing. I want to be real clear about this because, there's some very often some critiques around this.
Yeah, I was going to ask this. Yeah.
So systems of oppression harm all humans, period. Right? That is not to say that we are all harmed in the same way.
Right.
That is not to say that we are all harmed to the same degree. That is not to say that our attention should be allocated 50-50, right? I'm not saying that at all.
Right.
I'm saying all humans must heal from oppression, all forms of oppression, and every role that they play, period.
Right. And it is impacting every single person one way or another.
Right.
Yeah.
And, I think what very often gets overlooked in these conversations are the intersections, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the thing about anti-oppression work, there are some people who do anti-oppression work very thoughtfully and in an intersectional way.
Mm-hmm.
And there are others who do anti-oppression work where race is the sole focus and does not get the conversation doesn't have nuance added to it, where we're talking about age and we're talking about ability and we're talking about gender, right? Like it needs to be a very nuanced conversation, and it must be had in a way, again, that does not mimic and nor reproduce the dynamics of oppression. Because if you do that while you're having discussions on racism, then you are doing the work of further instilling and further harming the internalized oppression that is occurring amongst other identities.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, like it undercuts the larger effort of collective liberation of all forms of oppression.
Well, and especially when you're creating these spaces for this conversation, you're asking people to come likely in a more vulnerable, open state than they would in their everyday life, right?
Oh,
And so
absolutely.
you're open and your soft spots are available.
Mm-hmm.
And when your soft spots are available, it's so easy to be wounded further in that soft spot if we're not aware of where those soft spots are. Not saying that everybody needs to have, to be in a space and in a room of conversation, everyone needs to go through their whole therapeutic history of all the things that have happened, not that, but the acknowledgement that in these spaces of conversation, we are putting our armor down that we're operating in everyday life about, and we just need to be a little bit more considerate of the fact that when we're saying things, we're coming from places of dominance that we may not be aware of.
Right, and different people wear armor in different places and spaces for different reasons. And while you, as a white person, may not be wearing armor as it pertains to race, you may damn well be wearing it as it pertains to gender, for example, having experienced men's violence.
Right.
And the thing about violence and trauma is that it's very easily re-triggered and re-stimulated, such that such that things like, I don't know, there are all kinds of triggers. I guess we don't really need to go down that road, but this is why we must be very careful and thoughtful about the pedagogy that we use.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. Tone policing, right?
Yes, bring me there,
Tone policing, again, is one of these things that we talk about quite frequently, but we don't get into the nuance of quite frequently.
Can you take a minute to pull back to talk about what tone policing, like tone policing is, if no one's ever heard of it before?
Yes. So if you look on my Instagrams, I have a whole post on it, and there's a bunch of stuff in addition to the post in the comments. But basically, tone policing is a tactic that gets used by dominant groups toward targeted groups to dismiss an idea or dismiss a point or argument that is made because of the way the point is made. So, and it generally occurs when the message that is being sent is perceived as laden with emotion. So whether it's angry or frustrated or hurt or whatever, if the message is in any way perceived as or can be constructed as being emotional, then the entire argument is dismissed.
Is thrown away
because of the way that the argument is made. So I think there were a couple of key points that I made on that post, if I remember correctly. The first is that tone policing is what they call it ad hominem, or it's a personal attack. And so what that means is, rather than addressing the point that is being made, people who engage in tone policing are attacking the person making the point.
Right.
And this is one of the fascinating things about me, or about this point that I like to talk about. By the time someone gets to the point where they are communicating a message that is loud or angry or frustrated or hurt or has tears or rage or whatever, listen, it ain't the first time that message has been sent.
Right. It just hasn't been received.
Right. That's the point.
Yeah.
And the other point is that people who are in targeted groups get to be as pissed off about being targeted as they want to be.
Right.
Right. So the thing about tone policing is that it's several things. It gets used to silence or derail or control or pull away from or disengage from a conversation by controlling the behaviors of the people participating in the conversation, or by controlling the conditions under which the conversation occurs.
It's allowed to occur. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So if me saying your behavior is white fragility makes you uncomfortable, or it's one of the ways that tone policing works is you get to construct that in any way that you want.
Right.
Like black women in particular suffer from this because of the angry black woman stereotype.
Yes.
So the thing is, if you are inherently perceived as being angry, it doesn't matter what tone you use.
Right. Right.
But the thing about that is that Latinas also have a stereotype. Like there are all manner of stereotypes. So what I'm trying to say is that this is a tool of oppression.
Right. And I'm just I pulled up your post, and because I do think it's worth us. The 5 phrases I think are worth talking a little bit about. Okay. So, or at least putting alongside this, because we're talking theory a bit, and I want to make sure. So like there are, let me see if there's, I could say that all. So the first one that you have on here. So in Dr. T's Instagram, he has 5 phrases commonly used in tone policing. The first one is calm down. Like if you could just calm down and then tell me about it, that would be cool. And this is one you just mentioned. You're being too emotional right now is number 2. Number 3 is, must you be so angry? 4, I'd rather, oops, I skipped. I'd be more willing to listen if you changed your tone. See, in my mind just went, I'd rather if you brought your tone to a different, more kind place. That's where my mind went.
Right. No, that's another perfect example.
Right? And then 5, the last one that you have on here is you're hurting your cause when you use that tone. So if the way you're speaking is actually hurting what you're trying to say. So if you could just say it more nicely, right? More, just be more soft about it. If you could be more of what makes me feel comfortable,
right? Then
I'm willing to address this oppression that's happening to you, this thing that you're upset about. If you could just like tone it down, and really, if you could just numb yourself from the experience of how bad this is, I'm much more happy to hear about it, because then if I hear about it that way, I can easily just let it go in one ear and right out the other, because that feels much more comfortable. Yeah. So I thought that was great. I saw that and I was like, yes, thank you for calling this out.
Right. So again, by the time people get to the point where they're communicating, so the thing about human communication is that it's not just our words that communicate stuff, right? There's verbals and there's nonverbals. And in verbals just doesn't include the words that you use. It's the volume that you use. It's the pitch that you use. And right? There's so much to be that is communicated in the way we say something that is important to pay attention to. And so rather than tone policing, a better way to respond is to listen to first of all, listen to the argument that is being made. Secondly, listen to everything that is being said. Because if someone is saying something to you in a very loud voice, they are something. They are angry, they are frustrated, they are hurt, they are something. That is worth paying attention to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's not just, I mean, if you think about it, it would be like reading transcripts for everything and then feeling like you got the full breadth of every experience, if you really are playing it that way, right? Like if you can just tone it down to making it super monotone so it's super easy for me to understand the words, then I'll understand what you're saying. It's like if you watched a movie, right? But you never got to hear any aspect of it or see, and you're not watching this movie. But I'd really just prefer to just absorb it in the way I feel the most comfortable. So maybe it doesn't make me actually feel something.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I think the other thing is that it's important for people, particularly people of dominant groups, to understand that someone expressing emotion while they're expressing a point is not a personal attack.
Right.
So if I'm yelling at you because you did some racist shit, that is not a personal attack. That's me responding to your racism with emotion. Now, that is not to say that that there couldn't be a personal attack. Maybe
right.
Like that's a possibility.
But volume
in and of itself,
right.
In and of itself, expressing an idea with emotion is not a personal attack.
True. And it's so funny. My personal experience with my mother, I've actually been having this kind of dynamic because I am a very expressive human and always have been. And a lot of this work that I've been doing and learning from, obviously I get very emotional and I feel it in my bones, and I come with a lot of emotion, and sometimes it's yelling, sometimes it's excitement, sometimes it's passion, sometimes my body's shaking, right? And a lot of times we've gotten to a point where we now have like code words that we can use that's like, this isn't about you, this is about this experience right now. Like needs to get out of my body, and it's going to come out of my body with a lot of emotion because it's been suppressed for years and years and years, or because I've had to use the acceptable words and no one's actually understanding the translation of what the meaning really is. So that I know that safe vanilla way of saying it isn't working. Maybe I shouldn't have said vanilla. I don't even know. I like vanilla ice cream. But I think there's a part of this that's like, it's so internalized on so many levels that and again, you talked about the intersection. So even just the gender dynamic of a woman getting emotional and excited, right? It's too much. If you could be quiet, or if you're crying, oh, I can't handle your tears. If you could stay over there. If you're angry, I don't know. Because as you were talking about, it's okay to be angry. Women can't be angry, right? Women can cry, but even if you cry, if you could do that, not in front of me and handle that yourself, that'd be cool. And just this experience of what emotion brings to the party, right? Much more comfortable talking about thought and theory than the emotion and feeling of things. And so there is something so interesting in how, oh God, this is like hitting me so hard right now, how like the oppression of just emotion and emotional experience itself perpetuates all the other aspects of oppression that we're playing around with, that even just the feeling of it isn't allowed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, sorry. Whew. See, I said sorry. I just said sorry because I got emotional.
Yeah, like I was gonna say, there's not much to apologize here. Like I'm riding with you on this one.
Yeah. So
there's for me. So in and of itself, tone policing is complex and happens in a myriad of ways and has ripple effects in a plethora of different directions. I think what is important to note about this is that it reproduces and mimics and reinforces the dynamics of oppression, and it preserves the privilege of dominant groups.
Yeah.
So there's another piece to this, and that other piece is this. The way that we communicate matters. And so I think I made this point in my post. But saying I won't listen when you communicate that way is not necessarily the same thing as saying I can't hear you when you communicate in that way.
Mm-hmm.
So, here's what I mean by that. Human beings don't think well or communicate well when they are in pain. And they don't have access to their best thinking. We don't have access to a lot of stuff when we're in pain.
Right.
And so a metaphor would be, I just banged your thumb and gave you a very complicated math problem to solve.
Yeah, figure it out.
You're probably going to be like, fuck that math problem, my thumb hurts.
Can someone fix this? My thumb's pointing the wrong direction.
Right, exactly. And so the thing is, people who are targeted by oppression live in systems that, well, first of all, we carry generations of hurt within us, right? Like trauma crosses generations.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that generational trauma, we're also carrying the hurt from our own experiences of oppression.
Right.
So there's a lot of pain there.
Right. Yeah.
This is why one of the core pieces of critical liberation theory is healing is an absolute necessity. Because in order to create a society that is liberatory in nature, one that works for all of us, we all need access to our best thinking.
Wow.
And we get access to our best thinking by creating places and spaces and communities where we can heal.
Mm.
Now,
and that healing is prioritized. That it's not
absolutely,
because you talked burnout, right? So it's this whole idea we're operating in a society that still glamorizes burnout or the process that gets you to burnout, like it's the equivalent to wealth. It's this shiny, wonderful thing. The hustle culture is so real.
Yeah.
But I also want you to take care of yourself, and I also want you to have self-care, and I also want you to heal. But really, first though, if you could be productive, that'd be helpful. Right. And if you burn out, then that's your own thing to deal with, but come back when you're healed. And healing is important, but we're not going to make the room for it. And so really creating the space for it and prioritizing it is something that, we use the language, but we don't walk the walk there.
Right. And then also like creating the healing that you need, not the healing that I need. So for example, there are some people if I'm a person of color, for example, I may not want to do healing with white people. Right? I may want to be and need to be in spaces that are full of people of color. Or more specifically, I may need to be in places where there are all black people. Or I may need to be in a place where healing is paramount. I don't care what race the other person is.
Right.
Both of those things are valid.
Right.
And one of the things that critical liberation theory says is that when we do this work together, we go further, faster, and deeper than if we do this work alone or only within specific groups. So here's what that looks like. In the program that I was in, I had colleagues, for example, who were very good about working with me as I was divesting myself of my internalized homophobia. And when I said something problematic, they called me in, we had a conversation, and it was an honest conversation, and we worked around it, and they didn't throw me away. They held space while I figured it the hell out. Those same colleagues were white and often said racially problematic shit or did racially problematic shit. I didn't throw them away. I called them in. We had a conversation. They worked around it, finagled it, and so forth. And as a result, each of us got further in our learning in those respective spaces than we would have gotten by ourselves.
Right.
So this is not to say that you cannot or should not heal within a specific social identity group. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if that's what you need, yes, absolutely.
Right.
And at some point, it is advantageous. It's not mandatory. It is advantageous if we come together to do this work collectively.
Right. Well, and I think the part of it that's interesting that you mentioned too is though we're not getting, you're not getting an award at the end of the process of saying, okay, you're done, you're never dealing with this again.
Hmm.
You're working through this, and you will fortify, hopefully, through this healing. For if you're feeling as though you can only operate in one particular space to do your healing, there's a growth to this, that if you're able to heal to a point where it's not necessarily as raw, right? It's not as triggering to
Hmm.
be in a group of people that are not all one identity group. It can be a progressive experience. It doesn't have to be you
Hmm.
decided to heal this one way and you've got to stay in that one place. The
Yeah.
idea is that you can actually find multiple places and
Right.
environments of healing for yourself, and in doing that you create that for other people, and you model that for others who might not really know what to do.
Right. It's not an either or
Right.
proposition. It's
Yes,
a both
and
and.
yes.
Now, that being said, uh, knowing that each of us carries both our own personal pain as well as generational pain,
Mm.
it is incumbent upon us to do our own healing. We are responsible for our own self care. Now, collectively, as a community, we are responsible for creating spaces where that can happen, no matter what that looks like. But it is each of our individual jobs to engage our own healing and to be consistent in that.
Mm.
So, as a part of that, healing. So, I want to bring this back to this point around being around communicating,
Yeah.
because in tone policing, because again, there's a difference between saying I won't listen when you communicate that way versus I can't hear you when you communicate in that way.
Yeah.
And so when someone is in very deep pain and they're speaking from a place of pain, I'm going to hear pain, right? And if that's the point, cool. But if there's something more that I need to get from that, it, I believe that it is my responsibility, while it's your responsibility to listen carefully, it is my responsibility to communicate carefully. Sometimes, absolutely, that means communicating with all the emotion that you have, both barrels, all day, every day. And
Yeah.
sometimes it means being very clear to differentiate what is a trigger and what is a pattern, and when your patterns are triggered and how that's impacting your communication,
Mm.
so that you can take control of your communication process, act outside of your pattern, and communicate clearly. And the more that we do the work of healing,
Right.
the easier it is for us to do that.
Yeah. And there is this other thing of, you were talking about calling out and calling in, and I think that that's such an interest. Well, you were talking about calling in, but I think the throwing away is you mentioned calling me in and not throwing me out. And I think that
Hmm.
we operate in this space. So I did a TED talk back in April, and one of the things I talked about was this world that we live in that will either glorify or vilify you, and you get one or
Hmm.
the other. There's kind of no in between. We don't leave room in that spectrum for you to live as both someone that can make decisions that are wonderful and things, and make mistakes that might hurt others.
Hmm.
And I'd love to hear a little bit about what I mean, what calling out is all about, and the throwing away, and how important calling is, because I think we've talked a bit about the progression of what social justice conversations have looked like, and the spectrum that you were talking about to liberation. um, but really understanding, because a lot of, especially people that aren't used to this language discourse education even,
Hmm.
a lot of the experiences that we're seeing are a lot of what we see on a large frame of things is calling out, of saying, you're racist and that's the end of the conversation, you're bad, get out of here,
Hmm.
you're good, you can stay here, but you make one call, you're out of here. And so just kind of, I'd love to hear a little bit about your thoughts on that
Hmm.
experience of being called in when things are coming through as misogynistic or racist or homophobic or whatever the isms, even if it doesn't necessarily end in an ism, is.
Hmm. Well, first I wanted to tackle that a phrase you just used of "you're racist."
Yeah,
Um, on I'm sorry to keep going back to my Instagram, y'all, but
keep going. It's good.
the way that I use my Instagram, first of all, if you scroll way back to the beginning of my first Instagram post,
Yeah.
there is two grumpy old men, and the phrase that you see in that picture is "get off my lawn," and that's how I feel about social media. Like I'm not an old dude, but I'm grumpy, and when I get old, I'm gonna be a grumpy old dude, and I'm gonna be that dude saying, get off my lawn. That's how I feel about it, right? But all of that being said, I try to be I do a lot of long form Instagram posts,
Yeah.
and I do a lot of 5 things because I want to make very useful things that people can sort of take in very quickly. But I also try and add as much nuance as possible, right? Because none of this stuff, again, is black or white. It's way more shades of gray than is often presented. And so, as it pertains to the language of "you're racist,"
Yeah.
I don't. Uh, oh, there's a post on my Instagram that says, "Are white people racist?"
Yes.
So if you see that, check that one out. But in that, I say that in my personal practice of doing this work, teacher, facilitator, and all the other stuff that I do, I don't say you are racist. I will say what you have done is racist, what you have said is racist, the way that you are acting or that thought process is racist. But I will not say you are racist, because first, oppression does not define human beings. First and foremost. Secondly, it is extremely important for the purposes of liberation that we develop the skill of differentiating between the human being and the patterns of thought and belief and action that the human being has been socialized and forced to believe. Because if we can more clearly differentiate the two, then A, we are better able to see it is not us versus them, it is us versus it.
Right.
And if we can do that, then it is easier for us collectively and individually to begin the process of acting outside of the patterns of dominance we were socialized into. And if we can do that for ourselves, that means we can also hold space for other people to learn to also do that for themselves. And once we begin to do that collectively with more frequency in the places that we occupy both dominance and subordination, now we're talking, right? So if we're talking about racism and you as a white person are acting outside of the racist thought and behavior patterns that you were taught, and I as a person of color am acting outside of like the internalized subordination, acting outside of the roles that I was taught, now there are two of us who understand that there's an entire system operating over here that we ain't a part of any longer, right? We're doing the work to stay out of it, but we can see it, and we can see it clearly, and we can see it strategically, right? We can see that there are people who are in the matrix that we got to unplug, and then we get to unplug them.
Yeah, no, I like that.
Metaphor.
That was good. So, okay, calling in. So we talked.
Oh, yeah, so calling in. So the thing about calling in, I mean, so this is, let's go back to critical thinking for a second. So part of critical thinking is naming the unnamed and naming the unseen. And so what that means is this. I always start my classes with an articulation of my own assumptions, because that is one way that I help you do the work. Right off the bat, when you're doing critical thinking, always look for the assumptions behind the point or the argument that is being made, right? And being clear about the assumptions also helps you to be clear about the purpose of that person's actions and the values that are at play.
Okay.
All right? That tells you where the person is coming from.
Okay.
So a call in is, well, it's several things. First and foremost, on the part of the person doing the call in, it's a tremendous investment of time and energy. Yes. So for y'all who are listening, if somebody is taking the time to call you in, Lord have mercy, shut up and listen. Be called in. Yeah. Like, with humility, be as humble as possible, listen to what is being said, ask questions of clarification, don't engage in the kinds of stuff. There's another Instagram post of 5 behaviors to avoid. Don't do those things. Don't do the minimization. Don't do the denial, like, oh my God, I'm certainly not doing that, or you're making a big deal out of nothing. That's denial and minimization. Don't do those things. Listen to what is being said. Because, at this point in the game, I'm a fan of working smarter, not harder. So there's some I'm not I ain't listen, I ain't calling everybody in. Sometimes I'm gonna let you stew in your ignorance
Right.
because as someone who is targeted, you and I in our respective targeted identities, we get to decide the places and spaces and people with whom we intervene and what our commitment and investment will be.
Yeah.
So understand a call in is an investment of time, energy, and attention to help make
Mm.
you a better person. Take it with love, accept it, embrace it, and learn. That being said, a call in also differs from a call out in that it has explicitly different purposes. And so call ins or call outs are used to force a change in behavior, to use shame, to use pressure tactics of one form or another to bring about consequences that will force the behavior change that we're looking for.
Right.
Right? That's what
Hmm.
a call out is. And I am a fan, as you so thoughtfully pointed out, I'm a fan of calling in people, but calling out oppressive dynamics.
Yeah.
And as it pertains to calling out people, that for me is an absolute last resort. I will call you in all day until you refuse to come to the table. And when you refuse to be called in, then you will be called out.
Mm.
And unfortunately, sometimes there are a lot of people, a lot of times, refuse to be called in.
And that's when the volume, the emotion, because the
Right,
amount of energy that comes with those multiple call-ins,
right.
right? Yeah.
Mhm. So, what is a call in? A call in is an invitation, and it's an invitation to several things. Depending on the person who is doing the call in, could be an invitation to a conversation, could be an invitation to a new way of thinking, new way of being, new understanding. Could be both, could be those and. But essentially, the point is instead of blasting you out in front of all of these people and calling out what you did is inherently problematic and I will invite you, hey, listen, here's what I noticed. Here's what I think about that. I'd love to have a conversation with you about more. Or it can be a coattail pulling, like I did the other day. So there's a feminist account on Instagram that used the word libtard. And my initial, and it was something related to illustrating some point about men.
Okay.
Um, which I appreciated the point that she was trying to make, but I did not appreciate the ableist language that was being used. So I sent a call in. Hey, notice I saw the post you made. I understand the point that you made. I also noticed the language that you made. And so there are ways that we can make points about members of dominant groups without further marginalizing members of other
Right.
uh, targeted groups. Or,
And the one thing that just popped into my mind is, just to differentiate between the fact that like that's not necessarily tone policing, right? Because you're saying,
not at all. I'm saying
right?
that the language that you're using
Yeah.
is oppressive to people with disabilities, including women with disabilities. In other words, in your attempt to make a point about men from a feminist perspective, you're being ableist and not necessarily anti-feminist, but not inclusive of women with disabilities
Right.
with that language. It is oppressive language, so it's important to reconsider. So what might a call in look like? It could look like all manner of things. It depends on the person and your relationship to them. So sometimes you can know the person and invite Uncle Ed who tells racist and sexist jokes at Thanksgiving to a
Oh,
call in.
Ed. Yep.
Yeah, in Ed. Or it could be someone that you have no relationship with at all. So me sending a message to the person of that feminist account. But it's an invitation to a conversation to create a space for learning, for growth, for connection, and a plethora of other
So many
things.
other things. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. I love that. So I love the idea of invitation because invitations can take many forms, like you mentioned. And the difference between kind of that cold spotlight call out shaming and the invitation. And if you've never had anybody acknowledge your behavior or your language before, it might feel like you've got a spotlight on you. But the idea that somebody may be just saying, hey, I just noticed this, can we come talk, is the
Hmm.
difference between those two. That it's
Right.
saying, you did something really, really wrong, you suck, you're awful, whatever that
You're
vibe is.
canceled. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But it's saying, hey, you just did something that I don't know if you're aware of it. Could still feel like I'm an asshole, I'm all these things, because
Hmm.
internally maybe that's what you're beating yourself up about. But
Yeah.
the idea of this conversation isn't over. This
Hmm.
dynamic isn't over because you made a mistake. I'm
Yeah.
just welcoming you for more conversation, for more discourse, for more learning, for
Hmm.
whatever.
Right.
And there is the part of it, like you said, you can choose not to participate. You can choose not to be called in, right? You can make that choice. That's your agency as a
Hmm.
human being. But to assume that people are going to continuously call you in and give you that generosity over and over again if you're refusing is it's I don't
It's
know what the word would be. It's
entitlement.
yeah, yeah, right, exactly. It's a bit entitled to assume that those that are targeted or those that are making the, even if they're not targeted, right? There are
Right.
people in dominant groups that are doing
Well,
this work as
also,
well,
right,
right?
making the invitation. Yeah.
Yeah, to assume that they're ever present for the call in whenever you're feeling it, um, is just not a realistic way of operating, and it's also something that perpetuates that idea of burnout. It perpetuates that lifestyle of whenever I'm ready, you should be ready, rather than
Hmm.
I might not be completely ready. This is uncomfortable. I'm willing to stretch myself to make this change or to really be aware of where I'm operating from.
Right, and also it is well, it's several things. It's that entitlement, and it's also labor. It's intellectual and emotional labor, right?
Mhm.
And so part of your job, if you are called in, is to learn from the situation and not repeat the same mistake.
Right.
If you are being called out time and time again for the same thing, it means that you are not making a genuine effort. And speaking for myself, there's only so many times I'm
Yeah.
going to call you in before you get a call out.
Right. Right. Well, and even more so, right? Because again, the intention does matter, like you said, right? So, like, if you are being called in or this reference is being made over and over again, it's not it's not a call to continue to do more of the same thing that you think you're doing to make it better. It's
Right.
really it's an invitation, even if it's not for that person, to pull back and say, what I'm doing isn't working. What are other ways I can do that? Or where else can I learn from that wouldn't be
Hmm.
taking the one person that's been willing to operate in this space with me? If I'm not able to move myself out of my lane that I'm in here into
Hmm.
another one with them, how can I do this work either on my own or pay somebody to do, pay somebody that their work is this stuff to help
Hmm.
me do this work?
I'm so glad you brought that up. I don't think people. Uh, I think with the advent of social media and the proliferation of free content, I think the labor that it takes to do this work has become devalued.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And anytime y'all see a five things post from me, you better believe it's at least an hour or more at work, usually several hours of work, because I take very complex phenomena, simplify it, and break it down into 5 points. And in
Right.
those 5 points, you get a massive amount of information. And then in the comments, you get further clarification and you get additional information that is necessary for you to utilize and access the points that are being made.
Yeah.
And so don't be, well, first of all, let us acknowledge the existence of classism. Not everyone has the means to support or offer money to or purchase courses or. And so if you don't, there are plenty of free resources out there, and it's one of the reasons that I put free resources out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Lots of people need this information, and I can point you to a whole bunch of different places on the web where you can get some information. Uh, the downside of that is that you need to be discerning in terms
Right.
of what you're consuming, right? That being said, if you are a person of means, then support the people you're learning from because it is super time intensive and labor intensive and to create the resources by which you are becoming a better human.
Right.
And so what might that look like? Purchase their courses
Yes.
or become a Patreon supporter or send them $5 for a cup of coffee because if y'all like me, you got a coffee habit. like all day, no, that's not true. Like 1 or 2 cups. But still, I'm a coffee snob and my beans are expensive. So like work with a brother is what I'm saying.
Caffeinate me, please. Yeah.
Please, please. I also accept chocolate, and also don't, if you, this is another thing. If you believe in the person that you're learning from and you appreciate them, be an amplifier.
Yes.
Amplify their work, amplify their voice. If you have a skill set that might be useful to them, offer your services. Like, help get the message in the world. And what's challenging about doing this work, y'all, is that there's part of the way that classism operates in the space is a belief that social justice work is work that should be done simply because it's good work to do.
Yes.
Listen, y'all, it took me a really, really long time to learn the things that I know, to develop the perspective that I have, to sharpen the skill set that I have. And what nothing about that free.
Right.
So, yes, it is good work. And if you're skilled in doing this work, then you have made an investment in learning that skill. Y'all, it ain't that hard. Support the people that you're learning from.
Right.
And this is one of the reasons I always mention Barbara's name. She is, when it comes to this particular set of work and skills, primary influence. And any opportunity I have to put her on versus put me on, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah. I love that. I love that so much. So in that same vein, I want to talk a little bit about the stuff that you're bringing to the world so people can know about it. Because I feel like we just got a wonderful amount of free content from you today.
It's true.
And so how do we, right? The amplifier that I am, I can't control myself. That's just how I operate in life. I want the listeners to hear more about how they can learn from you and be in wonderful areas of call-in, of discourse, of dialogue, and of education with you. So if you could tell a little bit, I know there's a couple courses you got coming up. You mentioned your mailing list. I want to hear about these. And also, for those of you listening, the links and stuff will be on the show page, on the show notes.
Yeah. Does that also include like the little Instagram thingies that I mentioned, or just the main Instagram?
You can do what you can do. What I was thinking was your courses that you got coming up, and signing up for the mailing list you were talking about. I feel like makes a lot of sense to get people just really an understanding of the levels of information that they'll be getting from those spaces and ways to.
Okay, yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so first, I have a couple of Facebook groups that I think you will find helpful. One is called Everyday Action with Dr. T. That one is a general place of where you can, I post a lot of articles in there. If you have a question, you can post questions. And the thing I love about that group is there's a lot of brilliant people in there other than myself. So I don't, just so you know, I don't answer questions right away because I create space for other people to answer those questions. And they do a wonderful job. So it's a great community. There's also a Facebook group called, oh man, this is bad. I forgot the name of my own group.
It's okay. Talk about what's in it. We can get there.
It's called Beyond. Oh man, it's a group where white people can come to ask questions about racism and whiteness, and it's called Beyond Guilt, Beyond Shame: White People Processing Racism with Dr. T. There is a group for biracial people. It's called And/Or.
Hey.
But we don't have a lot of biracial people in there.
I'll see you in there.
Okay. There's not a lot of us. So if you are a biracial peeps and you want to participate in conversations with other biracial, multiracial peeps, please come join us. So that's my free content stuff. My primary course is called Foundations of Social Justice. It is an 8-week deep dive into social justice stuff. So we don't do a deep dive into specific isms, but we do a deep dive in understanding how oppression in general works. And the thinking behind that is, once you understand, well, first of all, we focus on liberation in the first half and then oppression in the second half. And the point is, liberation, you learn to think about these issues from a different perspective, a different way of being in the world, and a different way of doing this work. And then we talk about oppression. And the point in talking about oppression first is because all systems of oppression have very similar underlying fundamental mechanisms. So political, socioeconomic disenfranchisement, violence and the threat of violence, so forth and so on, right? So learning how oppression itself works, how systems of oppression works, gives you a much stronger platform from which to do additional work. So once you understand how oppression works, it makes it much easier to understand how racism is a system and how it functions and how it supports and is similar to sexism as a system and how it functions. So it's called Foundations for a reason. It establishes a very strong understanding and foundation for you from which to do additional work. So that's the first class. Second, I teach a self-awareness class that is only open to people who have completed the Foundations of Social Justice course. And the thinking behind that is, in order for you to do this work effectively in any way whatsoever, you must understand how you have been impacted and hurt by systems of oppression and how that shows up in your life.
Right.
So self-awareness for social justice is a really powerful course in helping people to understand themselves, their triggers, their patterns, the belief that underlie their patterns, and then helps them to develop contradictions to those patterns. In other words, it gives them the tools that are necessary for them to begin to learn, again, to live outside of the systems and thought and belief that they were socialized into dominant groups. And it helps you see the places where you were hurt. It helps you differentiate between your hurt and other people's hurt, so you can clearly understand what is yours and what is not yours. It does just a bunch of really powerful stuff.
Yeah.
I recently taught a class called Advanced Self-Awareness for Social Justice, and that's because the people who took the self-awareness class
wanted more.
Wanted more. They were like, man, like we should do more of this. I'm like, okay.
You're like, I took it a couple times too. Heck yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, because the thing is, once you start really digging into your stuff and you begin to make connections, it is both powerful and liberating, but also it taps into some very deep pain.
Yeah.
And the thing is, all of us are running around here with these bulging doors that are been nailed shut.
Yes.
And so what we do in self-awareness is we learn the process of opening the container, holding the container, and closing the container, so that you can come get some healing and then have that container closed up so your shit's not all like flapping in the wind and you're not all messy and whatnot. Close it up. You can go back and function into the world and then come back for the next week and we do it again. And the more we open the container and the more that we heal, the more effective we are both in our everyday life and in doing this work. So there are two courses there. I am working on a liberatory action and allyship course. That is taking a little longer because I want that to be skill-based. So, for example, I developed a list of 25 ways that members of dominant groups derail conversations with responses on what to do when that happens. Wow. I have role plays. I have all kinds of cool stuff. So it's an actual how to do the work of allyship. So that is in the works.
Yeah. So how do people follow you to find that when that comes?
So follow me on the Instagrams or on the Facebooks. You can also join my mailing list, and my mailing list peeps get top priority. There's one other course I want to mention. I am always looking for more effective ways to do this work for people and to have them develop the skills necessary to do the work. So I am in the planning stages of creating a dialogue-based course. Nice. And so in the past, I've taught intergroup dialogue courses on Black people. Not Black people, I'm sorry. Well, yeah, I do Black. I did white people, people of color, Black and Latino, and men and women. And basically, the courses that I'm going to create are going to be focused on people talking to each other and learning from each other rather than simply from me. And people will have opportunities to offer their opinions, but offer informed opinions. So in other words, there will be lots of reading for you to do in order for you to participate in the dialogue process. Right. And it's just a way to talk about these issues and think about these issues with other people. So there's definitely going to be one of those for fitness professionals. And if I can get my co-facilitator on board, there'll be one maybe around race. We'll
Okay.
see.
Okay.
But those are coming up as well. You'll be able to find out about all of those things if you join the mailing list and follow me in those social media spaces.
And just, I see, I got so many questions, but why fitness professionals specifically?
Because I didn't, most of my career doing this work has not been in social media. As a matter of fact, I don't want to be like a influencer in this area. I want to influence people, but not be an influencer, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah.
And so most of my work in this area has been in academia, both teaching undergraduate and graduate, and then in working in the community, right? Being on the board of nonprofit organizations and creating programs and blah, 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 blah. So when I finished my dissertation, I was super exhausted. And I was like, all right, y'all, I'm retired. Don't ask me for nothing else, because y'all got blood, sweat, and tears. There's nothing left in the tank. So my friend Erin Brown, who y'all may know,
I follow her.
Yeah,
because of you.
Oh, that's my buddy.
Mm-hmm.
She is so wonderful in so many ways, and there was some tripped out stuff happening in the social media, social justice space, and some really problematic dynamics and problematic things being taught, and she kept trying to get me to look at it. She's like, T, you need to take a look at this. I'm like, hey, I'm retired, dog. Like, leave me alone. She's like, you need to look at this. I'm like, look at it. Fine, I'll look at it. And then when I looked at it, I was like, holy hell, I don't know, like, this is crazy. Just, some of the really unhelpful perspectives being taught and people teaching in ways that were damaging other people. Because as you said, coming to do this work from an authentic place is a very vulnerable thing to do. And inevitably, when you do this work, your worldview will implode, period. Because we are all taught that the world is X, Y, and Z. But when you look at the reality, you begin to understand oppression, that what you were taught and the real world collide. And it's not the real world that crumbles, it's your worldview. And when your worldview implodes, it's not just your worldview, it's your self-concept as well. Because if the world is not as you thought it was, that means that you, as a person in the world, are not who you thought you were.
Right.
And then that starts a whole thing. Yeah. So that's why pedagogy, again, is super important. So I got in here, I looked at all the stuff that's happening. I was like, man, like, I have this thing, like, if you know better, you must do better, right?
I just listened to a podcast from Oprah talking about that.
That's a
you and Oprah just hanging out.
I mean, that's a very
It was Maya Angelou, I think she said who was the person that said that to her, and she had anchored it in like all the things.
Well, I think Fannie Lou Hamer said it before Maya Angelou.
Sure.
It's one of those pieces of wisdom that's just been hanging around.
Right. You're like, my mom told it to me. She made it up. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, but it's something somebody told to somebody at some point. And now, if you're Black, you probably heard it before. So, but it's a very important thing. Like, when you see it and you know better, it's your responsibility to do better. So that's how I saw it. I was like, this is bullshit. And then, I hemmed and hawed. I was like, all right, fine. So then I started doing the work, and through Erin, I got introduced to Jen Sinkler, who is just a wonderful person and a lovely human being. She's a former rugby player, fitness professional, trainer, cares deeply about social justice. She just released something called The Prequel, which is a discussion on social justice in the fitness space.
Okay.
And then I met, who else did I meet? I met a whole bunch of fitness people.
Sure, yeah.
Right, because I entered through Erin, I met a whole bunch of people through Erin.
Yeah.
And a lot of those folks are in the fitness space.
Yeah.
So a big chunk of my audience is from the fitness space, which is a little weird because I'm not a professional fitness person, but I love professional fitness people. Yeah. And so
they have a lot of, a lot of times it's a much easier access point for people looking to make transformation happen. We've been, again, if anger is easier for guys and sadness is easier for women, fitness is an easier transformation than getting deep into
The
your
internal
emotions and
work.
vulnerability. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And so it's so interesting, man. But people, fitness professionals also work with people in the places that they are most vulnerable, right?
Right.
Around your body image, being in your body, and all manner of things.
Yeah.
So I just decided recently there's to bring fitness people together to talk to each other about the industry. And so I have Foundations of Social Justice, and then Foundations of Social Justice, the Fit Pro edition.
That's cool.
So yeah, the Fit Pro edition is only for fitness professionals. And we had class last week, and it brought up some really tripped out stuff I had never considered. So like how saviorism pops up so frequently among fitness professionals, and how that saviorism gets in the way of the liberation of people and people's capacity and willingness and desire to do their own work rather than have it done for them.
Yep.
Yo, that conversation was tripped out.
I'm like, oh, yeah, uh-huh. I feel like that could be a whole nother hour. My goodness. Okay. All right. Well, okay. So if you are a fitness professional, Dr. T is your man. Please go learn from him.
Also, but let me also say that
Yes,
I have fitness peeps that have learned with me who are like co-facilitating and in the course, because again, I'm not a fitness professional.
Yeah.
So, and I don't necessarily need to be to teach this material, but I think it's important that people with a deeper knowledge of the industry are present in the dialogue. So Stefan Drusek is participating as a co-teacher for this round of Foundations for Social Justice Fit Pro.
Nice.
She's brilliant. Her analysis on stuff, particularly related to body issue, and like she's just bad. So we're having a good time so far.
Good, cool. And then I want to make sure so mailing list people can come to your website. They can sign up there.
Or they can go to the Instagrams and hit my little link tree thing, and it'll have links to all of those things. So the foundations course, the self-awareness. Okay, awesome. Yeah, okay. You can get there through the link tree.
Oh my goodness. Well, this is wonderful. This is long. I think this might have been the longest one I've done. So
oh my goodness, 2 hours and 30 minutes.
I know. It's just how that 15 minutes turned into much longer. It's good. This is great. Yeah, okay. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it so much.
It has absolutely been a pleasure. This is a great conversation.
I'm not kidding. LA, coming. We're going to have
I'm down. I'm down to do it.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Talk soon.
Yes. I told you. Incredible episode. So much content, right? Wow. Dr. T and I had such a wonderful conversation. And as we mentioned in the episode, we spoke for about 45 minutes before we pressed the record button. So there's a lot to talk about in this area, and I am so grateful that he joined us. I want to just reiterate, if you have any questions, comments, anything along those lines, head on over to nikkyinnocent.com/podcast. Click on that Join the Conversation link and drop your comments, questions, topic suggestions in there. If you don't follow me on social media already, I am at Nikki Innocent on all the things, and I would love to hear from you. If you listen to this episode and you are just dying to share with the world, please feel free to share the post that I'll have on this, but also drop in the comments and let us know what you think. If you haven't rated and reviewed this podcast on your podcasting platform, please do so. It helps me understand how I'm doing, what I should do more of, what I should do less of, and it really, really helps just spread the word about this incredible space of conversation and these, I'll just say, badass human beings that have been so generous with their time to have conversations with me and share their stories with you and the world. And I can't wait to catch you next time. See you later.